I would say 9 out of 10 people who don't even know they have Morgellons disease, just like I didn't know I had Morgellons disease at the time, are treated exactly this way. The patient goes in, they seek help, they're victimized, and their symptoms get worse because the bacterial infection that's causing these skin problems is just spreading and getting worse. You go beyond where I was, where I couldn't even go on living anymore. You get your health built up enough over, a decade. I mean, it's since 2009. So for me, it's 13 years. And now you're actually reaching out to the healthcare authorities, and they're just standing behind the scientific study that they published, which has already been outed as a complete flawed study. There's no hope. There's no escape. So all you can do is just either keep on living or you can kill yourself. And in that regard, I would just say for the record that according to a number of experts, the rate of suicide for Morgellons disease patients is 800 times higher than the general population.
I have previously reported on the topic of Lyme disease and one of its strange afflictions, Morgellons or Morgellons disease, depending on who you speak with microbiologist Marianne Middelveen. Through the microscopic study and investigation into these calloused skin lesions of patients who claim to have filaments or fibers growing directly out of their skin, Middelveen has discovered that this strange affliction was not the delusion that it has been coined to be, and that these fibers were always seen in conjunction with a spirochetal infection, which is a classic marker of Lyme disease. Joining me now to discuss the reality of living with Morgellons disease is one of the subjects of one of Marianne's peer-reviewed studies. His name is Lance Ticolaz, and he is going to share how 13 years of advocacy around Lyme and specifically Lyme disease has affected him. Check it out.
Back in 2009, I was working for the BC Ministry of Tourism, and it was an everyday thing for me to be getting bitten by every single thing under the sun. And one day it came about that I got bit again by a black fly right on my back. And as I'm massaging it, I'm saying to myself, I didn't realize I had a mole there. And soon enough, I realized that was a tick. So I did what you're supposed to do. I didn't have much education on the matter. I just removed the tick. It was quite an ordeal to remove it by myself when it's on your back. So very soon after, within days, I started to get strange symptoms in my fingertips of all things. What I didn't know it at the time was that this bacteria that came from the tick is moving throughout my body, and it began to cause something that they call skin fibrosis. So the bacteria attacks the skin cells and it starts to increase collagen production. And I didn't know that. I just thought, I had calluses building up on my fingertips because of the outdoor labor. So that was my first symptom. And then that began to spread throughout my body. So I would get the sensation of bugs crawling in my skin, and I didn't know what that was. Then I began to get skin lesions, and I would be reporting this to my doctor, and he would just say, okay, just work on your hygiene and so on and so forth. And don't forget though, apart from these odd skin problems, I had issues from head to toe because of the vehicle collision that I was in. So ultimately, there were a lot of symptoms that were caused by the Lyme disease bacteria, which was causing the Morgellons disease symptoms as well. And those would include flu-like symptoms, achy muscles and joints, neck pain. There would be a good 25 symptoms if I were to list them off of ill health. And those would vary from week to week, month to month, headaches, migraines, swollen joints. I mean, stuff that if your doctor cannot even wrap their head around. 2 weeks later, I was hit by a vehicle driven on top of, fractured pelvis, injuries from head to toe. It took me 5.5 years before I would walk again. But 3 years later, as I began to rehabilitate a lot, I still had all these health problems. That's when somebody came along and said, you might have Lyme disease. And I thought, Lyme disease, what? And then it took me a while to realize that, oh my gosh, it could be that tick bite. Lo and behold, I get tested for Lyme disease. It comes out non-reactive. I don't know what that means. I assume that this isn't Lyme disease. And then a few steps down the line, I get tested again in the United States. It turns out to be positive. I get in touch with the Oklahoma State University Center for the Investigation of Morgellons disease. And I say, I have all these symptoms. I don't understand them. And they explain to me, yes, Morgellons disease is a real disease. It's associated with Lyme disease. And that's when I got the opportunity to be a human test subject in a Morgellons disease, Lyme disease study. It just so happened that it took almost 3 years before I even heard of the name Morgellons disease. So when I was reporting these symptoms to my doctor, he was just trying to treat me with ordinary treatments. When that went on for months, and I couldn't go on living another day with this disease, it was that bad. But that being said, I was just hanging on for dear life. After months of that, I was referred to a dermatologist. That dermatologist told me, oh, you have dermatitis. He prescribed me a antipsychotic drug, and he said, oh, there's a special ingredient in there. I've treated people with your same skin disorder before. Don't worry, you'll be cured in no time. I went back to him a couple of weeks later, and I was getting worse skin lesions on my body and rashes, and he just doubled the dose. I went back to him again, and I just said, this is not working. It's even worse. He changed his diagnosis to atopic dermatitis, and he continued to prescribe me things to the extent that I just lost complete faith in him. Later, I discovered through my own Freedom of Information request that he lied to me, committed malpractice. He secretly wrote a letter that said, I think this guy has a delusional disorder. I'm going to prescribe him these antipsychotic drugs, and hopefully his delusions will go away. And I should just note that this is, I would say, 9 out of 10 people who don't even know they have Morgellons disease, just like I didn't know I had Morgellons disease at the time, are treated exactly this way. The patient goes in, they seek help, they're victimized, and their symptoms get worse because the bacterial infection that's causing these skin problems is just spreading and getting worse.
Right. And the stress of all of it, I'm sure, doesn't help either. But why do you think that this affliction is being treated as a delusion and not an actual physical ailment?
I point the finger directly at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. They conducted a study, or they published a study on Morgellons disease in 2012. At that time, what their study determined was that anybody with Morgellons disease should be treated as a psychiatric patient with a delusional disorder called delusions of infestation, meaning you have a false belief that you have parasites in your skin and that you're infested with them. This is really controversial, not the disease itself, but what the CDC did, because the Oklahoma State University Center for the Investigation of Morgellons disease, the head of that department, Dr. Randy Wymore, was the peer reviewer for the CDC Morgellons disease study. He said from the outset, and he repeated again and again, that there were no Morgellons disease patients in the CDC scientific study on Morgellons disease patients. You can look that up on the internet. There's a film called Skin Deep, The Battle Over Morgellons, and he says it right there on film. Out of the 100 some odd patients they had in the study, they only tested about 12 people for the skin fibers, and he said none of them had the fibers underneath their skin.
There were 227 that had letters sent out to them. 115 met the case definition. That is the case definition they had. For us, it would be case definition meaning fibers in the skin, but that wasn't, of course, included in their case definition.
The fibers weren't included in their case definition of Morgellons?
No. no.
What was the case definition of the CDC had of Morgellons?
The belief of fibers in the skin, which is different from having fibers in the skin. Only 12 patients had fiber samples collected from them. And out of that 12, by my definition, there were no Morgellons patients simply because they could not observe fibers in any one of those 12 people. So the final population was the wrong population.
Backtrack on what Morgellons disease diagnostic criteria is. Fibers beneath unbroken skin. You can't put them there yourself. When they are tested by a laboratory by a competent healthcare professional, they're found to be composed of keratin and collagen made by the human body. According to the FBI, through Dr. Randy Weimer, live on TV in an ABC News special, they went to Tulsa, Oklahoma Police Department. They had their crime lab investigate these fibers. They used the FBI resources, and they said there is no match to these fibers on Earth. Like, these are unique. They seem to be what the human body is producing. So the CDC in 2012 concluded, we didn't find anything. These fibers seem to be textile fibers. And again, they didn't have any Morgellons disease patients who they tested fibers on. So their conclusion was completely the wrong conclusion, which is so controversial.
Mm-hmm. But it's not really, given that we've seen the way that the whole COVID narrative has been handled by these various three-letter organizations. So it seems controversial to some, but less and less, I think, as more time goes on to others. Now, how is this affecting the very real people who are suffering at the hands of this, again, really strange infection and the controversy around it? How is it affecting people who are living this experience?
I would sum it up in one word, that they are terrorized. It's the best way to describe it. Think about it. Just like you, just like me, before I had this, we're relatively healthy people. And suddenly you start getting crawling sensations over your skin. You show up to the doctors. They can't help you. You show up to somebody else. They diagnose you as being delusional. They prescribe you antipsychotic drugs. You don't even know what this is. You don't know what's going on. You do research on it and you can't find anything because you don't know what you're looking for. Finally, maybe like me, 3 years later, not able to live another single day, you find out that the CDC did this scientific study. They didn't have any Morgellons patients in it. And they're saying that this is a delusional disorder and everybody who's being treated that way is being prescribed antipsychotic drugs. Eventually you lose your job, you can't work anymore. You try to explain to people what's going on with you, and they do think you've gone a bit crazy. If you have somehow discovered these fibers in your skin, they're red, white, blue, green, and black. Try explaining that to anyone. They do think you're crazy. In my case, I was in the scientific study, so that really helped me out to validate this. Then, if you're like me, you become an advocate, you write letters to all the healthcare agencies, and I'm talking about here in Canada and in the United States, and you go to the heart of the matter, such as I did along with other advocates. We went to Atlanta CDC headquarters. They wouldn't even take the binder that I had with all the proof in it, 160 pages divided up into 8 chapters. When we finally did corner them by sending them multiple registered mail, certified mail, to the director of the CDC, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, she passed it down to the chief secretary, Sandra Cashman, and Sandra Cashman wrote us back, ignoring everything we put in our letter and just saying, we did an amazing study that we published in 2012, and here are all the great things about it. And meanwhile, the letter we sent them said, here's all the problems with this. Here's the scientific evidence to prove it's true. So imagine you go beyond where I was, where I couldn't even go on living anymore. You get your health built up enough over a decade. I mean, it's since 2009. So for me, it's 13 years. And now you're actually reaching out to the healthcare authorities, and they're just standing behind the scientific study that they published, which has already been outed as a complete flawed study. There's no hope. There's no escape. So all you can do is just either keep on living or you can kill yourself. And in that regard, I would just say for the record that according to a number of experts, the rate of suicide for Morgellons disease patients is 800 times higher than the general population. So what do you do?
Well, and what about you, Lance? Like you mentioned, you've been dealing with this for 13 years. So how are you coping now? And if you have a message to the medical community or perhaps those suffering in silence, what would it be?
That's a really loaded question. I would start with reach out to me, okay? Managing Morgellons Lance at gmail.com. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. We have to pool our resources together. Everybody with Morgellons, with rare exceptions, they're just on their own and they don't talk about it to people because, again, imagine the stigma that comes along with this. So reach out to me. Another one, you can sign, there's a petition in the United States, which anybody in the world can sign. That's at managing-morgellons.com. It goes straight to Joe Biden. For over a decade, people have been killing themselves because they have a real disease that they're being told is a psychiatric disorder. So there's a lot of hope. However, we have to pool our resources together. And for those who are really hanging on for dear life, I would even recommend a YouTube channel. It's called Managing Morgellons. I'm associated with the Managing Morgellons group, but this particular YouTube channel, Brittany, she's the host, and she will put out videos almost every day. And I feel bad for not having mentioned this particular foundation yet, but they are called the Charles E. Holman Morgellons Disease Foundation, and they have been at it since day one. They have been collecting donations for quite some time. They have been funding a lot of independent top peer-reviewed scientific studies into Morgellons disease. And if it weren't for them doing this, pooling together resources like I'm talking about, everybody would still just be all on their own. And there you can even see pictures. You can actually see the fibers for yourself. And it would be great if doctors actually put their necks out on the line and confronted the CDC, but that hasn't happened.
I wonder why.
Yeah, well, they've got an entire job and they just know that the CDC is powerful and they'll get in a lot of trouble if they do the right thing.
When Lance refers to the Charles E. Holman website, he also urges anyone interested in learning more to review the 17 peer-reviewed studies specifically that they reference. He hopes that with continued attention on this affliction and support, this undeclared epidemic that healthcare authorities are ignoring will start to receive the attention and patients receive the treatment that they deserve. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. Shopping the Rebel News store is a great way to support our work while also sporting sassy new swag. Head on over to rebelnewsstore.com and hurry before it's gone, because for a limited time, you can use code SUMMER to buy 2 unisex shirts and get the third one free. Check out all of our swag and get your free shirt at rebelnewsstore.com.